I think Joe's still working on it, but
All right, so if nothing else.
We'll be there.
Real quick, the property, well, we kind of mentioned this earlier. Properties that have affordability periods that are ending.
Tommy, just a heads up that we can hear the housing production team in the
Pretty much the same
background.
with the.
okay, yeah, I'll mute. Thank you. I'll mute
our
myself.
phase.
Thanks. STLTV, do we have any other participants in this webinar? I can't see anyone else here.
Lisa's having issues getting on too. She's right next to me.
That's great.
So
It's
Tom, we
difficult to
can't
get
hear you.
on Zoom from here.
We're still in practice mode. We're gonna wait for Joe to I believe connect us to YouTube, and then we'll
I think we're live on YouTube, Tom.
are we?
Yeah, it looks like it in the top left corner, but it sounds like we are still in practice session and people can't get into the webinar.
Let's just take this time to
Sounds good to me.
move into public presentation mode and take a few exhales. Lower the heart rate a little bit. It's been a big week and it's only Wednesday.
I think we're ready. I just want to talk to the community stakeholders. I'm sure you have questions.
This one, kind of minor, but also kind of important. Talking with you, Bill, and Stephanie a bit on this. Regarding the M-Drive for asset management. The way it's set up right now, I mean, I can plug things in where I can, but I would really like to.
Do like that we can hear the housing production team hard at work. But it does say that we're still in practice session. How do we get this?
Okay, I got it. I'm back. I'm sorry, I had some problems. Okay, we can ready to start now.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
really quick, Tommy, can you send the PDF to all of us? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, it is live too on the website, and I will email this crew here the PDF I made.
Perfect. I'm gonna have it open in front of me.
All right.
Thank
We're
you.
ready to get started.
Okay, here we go, guys.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Do we know how many people are on from the public? Tommy, you're muted.
Well, let's take a few minutes and let everyone kind of join the room, because it looks like we're at 77 now.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. This is a CDA record. We're at 114. So it's really happy we got the word out about this. And I think we're really excited to do this Q&A.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's 3:07, so we can probably go ahead and get started with the presentation.
Let's not delay. We're at 119, and let's kick it off and do it.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're here today to talk about CDA's Neighborhood Transformation Grants, $20 million ARPA-funded funding cycle that opened last Tuesday and closes on May 15th. Here to provide an overview of the program as a whole and answer your questions. So let's just start with a brief overview of what CDA is. If you can go to the next slide, Tommy. So CDA serves as a clearinghouse for federal, state, and local funds for the city of St. Louis, administering a range of HUD funds, treasury funds, and we are charged by Mayor Jones with leveraging these funds to drive economic justice by funding a wide range of public and nonprofit entities. If we go to the next slide, you'll see a list of some of the entities we fund, and you can see that we fund everything from social services, youth, children, seniors, unhoused, to physical construction development of affordable housing. And we have over 1,000 housing units that we currently fund that are in the development pipeline, including 140 for sale units and roughly 1,000 rental units that we provide gap financing for, which are mostly LIHTC deals. If we move to the next slide, we'll dive into the neighborhood transformation grants, NOFA itself. And we've been going around the community over the past week, showing up at neighborhood meetings. And the purpose of this webinar is really to make sure everyone has access to the same information. As I mentioned, we did release this Notice of Funding Availability, a NOFA, over 75-page document that's been available on the city website. But we know not everyone has time to read a 75-page dense document. So I'm just going to go over it at a really high level, just to level set and get us all on the same page. And I should note, by the way, that I'm joined today by Tom Nagel and Kevin Ellison on my team, who do a lot of community engagement work with CDA and are helping arrange this tour of neighborhood associations, as well as Rashonda and Alexander, who's really leading this neighborhood transformation grants project, and Mariana Sansone, who's put an enormous amount of work into this NOFA as well. We will also be joined shortly, he's on another call right now, but by 3:30 by Bill Rata, our housing director, who also has a key role to play in the administration of the housing funds that we're going to talk about here. But at a very high level, we're talking about $20.25 million in available funds for the four purposes detailed on this slide here. And we're going to dive into each of those in some detail, because what essentially this is a NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability, but another way to think about it is as an umbrella under which there's a variety of requests for proposals, RFPs. And so applicants can apply for just one of them or for multiple of them, or can team up to apply for all of them. So without further ado, let's dig into housing production. Tommy, thank you. Oh, actually, I guess the next piece is really, no, go back. It's important to go over the timeline and the eligible geography, excuse me. So timeline, we released these, as I mentioned, on March 14th. Today, we're holding this public hearing. We're going to be holding at least one other public workshop on May 1st. We may decide, depending on the volume of questions that we get today, that it makes sense to do another public hearing and Q&A in April, but we'll be holding at least one more. And then the application deadline is May 15th, 2023. In addition, we then plan to review all applications and release our funding recommendations. And this all subject to change, but by Friday, July 7th, and then hold another public hearing where we want input on our recommendations. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll release our final awards. And we do plan to release final awards in advance of the LIHTC round. Next slide. At a very high level, it's really important to emphasize that we've applied an equity lens to this NOFA from the very beginning. The eligible geography you can see on the left-hand map there, and that's a function of both qualified census tracts as well as a deep analysis that CDA did in partnership with SLDC and the planning department to identify areas of the city disproportionately impacted by COVID. Because that's really the regulatory prong that all of this hinges on, is that while we are addressing a broad array of neighborhood needs, the purpose of these funds are to respond to the negative economic impacts of COVID-19. And so based on a variety of data points ranging from life expectancy, access to insurance, access to the internet, educational levels, violent crime rates, et cetera, we were able to put together this index of priority tracks, which you can see on the left-hand side. But we're not only trying to invest in areas of the highest need, although that's a key piece of our strategy. We also want to build off nodes of strength. And that's where on the right-hand side, you can see that as we talk about concrete development projects, about affordable housing production, about developing community assets like daycares or health clinics or other community or grocery stores or other community assets, that we want to invest near transit lines, near schools, near existing community assets. So that's what that map on the right shows, and those are bonus points that are available for physical development proposals. With that, let's dive into each of the 4 eligible uses, starting with affordable housing. So there's $6.75 million of muted. There's $6.75 million available for affordable housing. And that's really divided into 2 buckets. There's for sale affordable housing and rental affordable housing. For sale, affordability means under 80% AMI. And the period of affordability really depends on the amount of funding that the project receives, but can range from 5 to 20 years. And where all of these requirements come from for sale housing is from the analogous HUD home program, which Treasury released a really helpful affordable housing how-to guide, which essentially said that a safe harbor for eligible uses of ARPA funds was programs and housing that was compliant with the home program. And so that's where those for sale affordability requirements come from. For rental, we've actually gone further in requiring affordability at 50% AMI than regulatorily required. And that's because we've really followed the data. And the data tells us that of the 37,000 tenant households, which are cost burdened in the city of St. Louis, and which collectively spend over $100 million more than they can afford on housing every year, the vast majority of those are under 50% AMI. So we really want to make sure that as we're investing in this affordable housing stock, that we're really responsive to the challenges that city residents are facing. And that's why we've really targeted a deeply affordable level of 50% AMI. In addition, we are in accordance with ARPA requirements, providing for tenant protections attached to all this housing, including good cause eviction and fair housing protections. And these are all detailed in the NOFA, as well as quality standards, which are also detailed in the NOFA, and we can answer questions about as needed. It's also important to emphasize that we are providing bonus points for a variety of housing types that we want to invest in or we want to prioritize investing in. First and foremost, we've just seen construction costs sky high, and therefore really want to incentivize applicants to prioritize minor and moderate rehab, as well as tiny homes, as well as deferred maintenance, all projects that cost less than $100,000 per unit, so that we can really leverage these funds for maximum impact. In addition, we're providing bonus points for applications which propose to rehab vacant buildings, whether they're publicly or privately owned. But in addition, we are especially prioritizing proposals to develop CDA or LRA owned property. And then finally, we recognize that a big gap in our housing market currently is for larger families, and therefore are incentivizing and encouraging applicants with bonus points to propose housing development with 3+ bedroom units. With that, let's move on to the next category, which pertains to proactive development. Here, the key thing to add is that we're talking about proactive development of community assets. So the eligible projects here, there's enumerated or presumptively eligible community assets such as educational and health facilities, green spaces, affordable housing, projects that promote food access like grocery stores. All those are presumptively eligible. But we're also open to funding other community assets, provided that the applicant demonstrates with data and with any other evidence that there is a real community need for such an asset. And then when it comes for these eligible projects, these funds can fund both pre-development costs like site acquisition, environmental remediation, et cetera, but also construction costs. And an important note on this, and this also applies for the affordable housing development projects, is that we really need applicants to come to us with either evidence of site control or an option or preliminary sales contract. The exception there is LRA properties, which if you don't have that site control yet, you just need to propose your acquisition price or your plan for it, and we will submit those to LRA for LRA approval, and we will not make those awards absent LRA approval because they may have other plans for the property or other disposition requirements. So that's an important note on site acquisition. that applies to both proactive development of community assets and affordable housing. And these two categories, I should emphasize, really are conceptually similar in that they are categories which pertain to site-specific projects. And there's a conceptual distinction in the NOFA between these two categories which pertain to projects and the next two categories which really describe programs. So with that, let's move on to home repair. So there's $5 million available for home repair. And just as an overview for eligibility, this is to provide home repair services to income eligible owner occupants who are at or below 80% area median income. And that's $50,000 roughly for an individual, about $75,000 for a family of four. And they must be owner occupants as well. The key here is, though, that there's two different application tracks, one for construction contractors and another for nonprofit subrecipients. And I'll start with the contractors because the truth is we have so much work. CDA's wait list keeps growing, and we have plenty of funding. But what we don't have at this moment, the constraint on our ability to scale our home repair program, is contractors. And therefore, our top priority with this eligible use category is to invite contractors of any size to apply to help take on projects on our wait list. And so there's details in the NOFA regarding evaluation criteria, but it's kind of a unique piece of this NOFA because most of the rest of this NOFA is really geared around nonprofit applicants. But this is an important piece of the NOFA that really looks and feels much more like an RFP and requires really detailed responses with respect to crew capacity, repair experience, maximum guaranteed price for different types of repairs, et cetera. The other application track, however, is for nonprofits who wish to establish or expand their own home repair program and want to conduct their own intake. When you conduct your own intake, you become a subrecipient, and that means that you need to procure any external services, and that means every home must be individually bid, unless, of course, repairs are conducted by the nonprofit's own organizational staff. And then when we talk about eligible home repairs, there's a wide range of minor and major home repairs. And something I'll emphasize is that we are providing bonus points for applicants that prioritize and demonstrate a capacity to provide ADA modifications, such as wheelchair ramps or lifts, et cetera. With that, let's move on to neighborhood beautification and capacity building. And even though this is a single eligible use, and it's that way because the Board of Aldermen appropriated a line item to CDA of $14 million of neighborhood beautification and capacity building funds, which is $4.5 million of which are going out through this NOFA and additional pieces of which are being administered by LRA and forestry. This piece really has three sub components or three sub grant types that we're offering. The first pertains to neighborhood beautification. And so these are available for nonprofits that want to address dumping and pay residents to do cleanups or rent dumpsters or rollout carts, et cetera. It's also for redeveloping vacant lots. And the city's Vacancy Collaborative Vacancy to Vibrancy Toolkit is a great overview of many of the opportunities and possibilities with respect to transforming the city's vacant lots from liabilities into assets. And then it can also include other beautification activities such as planting trees, park improvements, murals, public art, lighting, et cetera. That's the first grant opportunity available under neighborhood beautification capacity building. The next is, if we go to the next slide, the next is capacity building grants, and specifically operating support grants. So these are available to nonprofits with operating annual budgets of less than $500,000 who are proposing to take on work under this NOFA, such as neighborhood beautification or housing production or home repair, what have you, but need additional staff to support implementation or need additional staff to support the programs that they're proposing for neighborhood transformation activities. They may also, in addition to salaries or payroll need support with professional services, contractual services, materials, supplies. So these are operating support grants to these small nonprofits that need to scale. And these are so important because I think something that we've all learned from this once in a lifetime infusion of ARPA funds is how our ecosystem, both public and nonprofit sectors, have been really starved of resources for so long. We're not in a strong position to absorb this volume of funds. And that's why building this capacity is so critical. But in addition, we know that we've created another opportunity here for technical assistance and grants, which are targeted not at the small nonprofits that want to build capacity, but at larger nonprofits, which have experience administering federal grants and can provide back office support, accounting, compliance, legal services, et cetera, to a whole cohort of nonprofits with less capacity that may not even be incorporated or may not even be have a bank account and therefore have the fiscal capacity to administer these grants. So that's an overview of the available funds. Let's dig into now some compliance elements and just some details regarding how CDA is going to evaluate these applications. So the first thing is who can apply. And there's subtle differences for each of the eligible use categories that I'll detail here. And I'll note that these slides are all available on the city website as well, and you can refer to them. But the answer is that for affordable housing production and preservation, eligible applicants include nonprofit developers, small for-profit developers and contractors, and we define small to mean that these entities have less than $2 million in annual operating revenues, and public entities. And what I should emphasize with all of these and kind of overarching is that whoever applies needs to have the fiscal capacity and the administrative capacity to administer federal grant funds. And that comes with significant compliance and reporting requirements. And so that is one of the reasons why we also encourage teams. But again, affordable housing, nonprofit developers, small for-profit developers and contractors and public entities. Moving down to proactive development of community assets, this is really targeted at nonprofits with development capacity and supporting nonprofits in developing these facilities which can serve as community assets. With home repairs, we discussed construction contractors of any size can apply, as can nonprofits with the capacity to administer home repair programs. For neighborhood beautification grants, it's nonprofits of any size with capacity to conduct neighborhood beautification. For capacity building grants, it's nonprofits with annual budgets of less than $500,000. And for technical assistance grants, it's nonprofits with federal grants administration experience. Let's move on to the next slide. And we'll take questions at the end of all of this. So now a few words on the application and review process. First, all eligible applicants need to fill out the application, but teams are strongly encouraged. So this is an important item that we received a lot of questions about and which we have clarified in the NOFA, is that while teams are strongly encouraged and are going to be required to submit their applications together and provide a team submission letter, essentially a cover letter detailing their partnership and their roles and responsibilities, et cetera. At the end of the day, each entity that is applying to administer federal funds needs to fill out the application independently. And that's because each entity that's going to receive federal funds is likely, there may be exceptions to this, but going to enter into an independent agreement with CDA. From a compliance purpose, it just makes things so much easier because the truth is that each entity may wind up being characterized in slightly different ways from compliance purposes. Some entities may be subrecipients, some may be contractors, some may be beneficiaries, and each of those are attached to different compliance requirements. So from a legal and compliance perspective, these are going to be independent contracts, but as we review the applications, we are going to be reviewing them holistically, and we are strongly encouraging entities to apply as teams because we want to see, instead of applications which propose conflicting proposals, we want the proposals to add up to more than the sum of their component parts and to really represent a holistic approach to addressing the neighborhood's needs. And so with that, as we turn to the review process, we're going to start Can we go back to the previous slide? We're going to start by screening the applications for eligibility. So we're going to confirm that applications are complete, proposed uses are eligible, and we may strike pieces of the proposal that are not eligible, or team members that are not eligible. Then we'll classify each of the applicants, as I mentioned, as subrecipients, contractors, or beneficiaries. And the next slide goes into a little more detail on that, because I think it's important for applicants to understand these compliance distinctions. And then we're going to break the applications into the component projects and programs. But before we do that, we're going to conduct a holistic review where we look at the application as a whole. And by we, I mean CDA review teams of at least 3 individuals will look at each application as a whole and evaluate them on the basis of the strategy that's being proposed, of the implementation plan, of the proposed budget and the degree to which it leverages other sources of funding, at the key performance indicators and the extent to which they address data-informed and needs which are evidenced by data, and community support. And then we break the applications apart into their component projects and programs, and we review each of those on their own accord. On the basis of qualifications and experience of the applicant team, and specific criteria that we're using to analyze each eligible use. And you can see all those details in the NOFA. Can we move forward 2 slides? There we go. So here's an important compliance note, and that is that this NOFA is designed to enable CDA to enter into agreements with subrecipients, contractors, and possibly beneficiaries, although it's more likely that beneficiaries would receive funds through subrecipients. But essentially the difference between subrecipients and contractors, let's start there, is that subrecipients are actually administering a program, and contractors are providing the city with goods or services. That's the fundamental distinction. And then what that means practically is, first of all, that whereas subrecipients can be selected pursuant to a risk assessment, contractors need to be competitively procured. But the way we've designed this NOFA is that we're competitively procuring every entity, including subrecipients. And that's something that is a tradition here at CDA, because that's something that HUD asked us to do back in 2014, was to, even though subrecipients don't technically need to be open and competitively procured, they can be selected pursuant to a risk assessment. HUD asked us back in 2014 to hold a real RFP and select all of our subrecipients subject to open and competitive processes. So that's what we're doing here for both subrecipients and contractors. Because we think that that's what's fair for the community, because there's so much need. And we want to make sure that everything is open and competitive. But the other really key difference is that whereas subrecipients essentially step into the shoes of the city and are required to comply with all of the relevant federal rules and regulations, including the uniform administrative requirements, that's 2 CFR 200, including the procurement requirements for goods and services, contractors are not. And so therefore, contractors can, once they are competitively procured, administer the program with slightly reduced administrative burdens. And then finally, beneficiaries typically are selected on a first come, first served basis within the parameters of eligibility set up by the program notice. And have even more reduced administrative requirements. So basically, what the first step we're going to take as we review these applications is to, as part of our eligibility screening, determine whether these entities are really designing and managing a program, and some of the key criteria, and you can look to 2 CFR 200.331 for the full multi-factor test. But some of the criteria are essentially, are they determining who receives federal funds, who is benefiting from this program, or are they really operating in a competitive market, providing these goods and services to a variety of purchasers, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to be doing that determination. And I think it's important for applicants to understand that context as they prepare their applications. And it's especially important for subrecipients, which will receive these funds, to understand this context in order to make sure that as they are designing their programs, they are bearing in mind the relevant procurement requirements and other federal requirements for their administration of federal funds. Next slide. So some other compliance requirements, and please bear in mind, this is nowhere near a full list, and the full list is available in the notice of funding availability. But entities will be required to provide regular financial and programmatic reporting. A SAM.gov ID is required. Proof of adequate insurance is required. Any awards of over $750,000 to a single entity will trigger a single federal audit. This, by the way, is another reason that it makes sense to split these contracts apart into separate contracts instead of making a team award. And awards of over $1 million will also trigger a written capital expenditure justification, which, if it is an enumerated eligible use, we just need to include in the file. But if it is not enumerated, we'll need to send up to Treasury. And then finally, and this is something we're really excited to share because it's not something that CDA has traditionally done, is that we will be considering requests for advance funding because we understand that a lot of these entities don't have the liquidity to float the funds. And we've talked to the comptroller's office and talked to city councilor's office. And while we can't do it in every instance because it does expose the city to substantial liability to repay funds, we will consider these requests on a case-by-case basis. Let's move on to the next slide. And then we have released a revised NOFA today, and I want to just go over the relevant updates that we included there. And one is what I already talked about in terms of kind of distinguishing how teams ought to apply and communicate to CDA that they are in a team. We also updated the required proposal contents to highlight the COVID-19 impact statement. It was in there, but we wanted to give it its own kind of section. And the reason why is that, and this is really important, the COVID-19 impact statement is what a finding that an entity is a beneficiary will hinge on. So if your applicant entity has a really compelling story of COVID-19 impact, please include it because that will help us conclude that that entity is a beneficiary, which will in turn mean potentially reduced compliance requirements. So please do pay special attention to that COVID-19 impact statement. Next, we clarified that affordable housing awards will be structured as forgivable loans and that public entities are eligible to apply. I think it was pretty implicit that they were forgivable loans, but we got this question of are they grants or forgivable loans, and want to emphasize that under Treasury guidance, they have enumerated forgivable loans as for affordable housing as an eligible use. And the reason that they're forgivable is because this is our prong to ensure affordability over time. And then they're forgiven when the affordability is complied with. And then also we clarified that proactive development funds may fund general construction costs as well as pre-development. And finally, we fixed a variety of minor formatting, spelling, and grammatical errors and updated the appendices to be a little bit more user-friendly. So with that, no, I think there's one more piece. I'm just going to mention a couple of open and upcoming CDA grants opportunities. These include 2 RFPs that we will be releasing this week. One requesting proposals for grants compliance services, and there's actually 3 different manuals that we are asking qualified contractors to respond to. One is an asset management manual, another is our Davis-Bacon manual, and the last one is an ARPA policies and procedures manual. The second item is really important from a home repair perspective, and that is we are going to be issuing a request for proposals for a title company to serve as the dispersing agent for our ARPA home repair pool. And that's going to really help us deploy these funds at velocity and hopefully attract contractors with more, again, accessible and timely disbursement of funds. We're also releasing a RFP to requesting workforce development services for early childhood education. That's essentially looking at entities that can administer programs to provide teachers and teachers' assistants with scholarship stipends, as well as with supplemental salary, and to support the certification of early childcare centers. And then we will also be releasing our HUD housing production NOFA in April. That will include about $8 million of CDBG and home housing production funds, as well as subject to HUD's approval of our home ARP program, a roughly $10 million home ARP housing production pool. Although those funds are not just for housing production, they're also for supportive services, for permanent supportive housing, and rental assistance. We're also excited to be partnering with the Regional Arts Commission to release operating program and artist support grants summer of 2023, and we'll let the Regional Arts Commission provide all those details on their own schedule. And then we will also be holding our regular CDBG funding cycle July through November. Finally, I would be remiss not to mention the 3 RFPs released by SLDC on Friday, seeking fund management services to establish a down payment assistance fund and pool, contractor loan, revolving loan fund, and a small business and nonprofit revolving loan fund. So with that, let's turn it over or move forward to our Q&A session. And we'll answer as many questions as we can. I may toss some of these to Rashonda and Bill. And there may be questions I should note that we can't answer, either because they're too specific or too complicated, in which we will ask you to submit in writing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tommy to facilitate our Q&A.
So I will go by hands raised first, but as you were going, Noel, people already submitted some questions in our Q&A. The first one is, by what time do these funds need to be expended or obligated?
Great question. The funds need to be obligated by 2024 and spent by 2026.
Great. And then could an applicant apply for different priorities
Yes,
of those
absolutely.
4?
Yes, absolutely.
And could an applicant apply in a team for one project proposal and then as an individual for a totally different proposal?
I think we're going to have to get back to them on that, but we can release an FAQ based on these questions with any questions that we can't answer at this time.
There is a member of a team, such as a contractor, and they are not chosen for some reason, they're unqualified. Does that hurt the proposal's ability to get selected?
If we're talking about something like home repair, where we are strongly encouraging even nonprofit subrecipients to apply with and identify contractors that they can work with, it would, because the truth is, with home repair, contractors are what we need. And we don't simply want to select subrecipients that have the administrative capacity to administer home repair programs, but that can actually deliver and complete the required home repairs. And so it really depends on the substance of the application. But if the contractor is a relevant piece of the applicant's capacity, and the contractor, for whatever reason, either doesn't have the requisite qualifications or is not in fact available, then yes, that would wind up hurting that application.
Let's go ahead and do some live questions. We'll bring some people on who have their hands raised. Just in order, let's start with Jeff. And I'm gonna.
I think, by the way, Tommy, that we can
bring you
probably take down the presentation, so we can
Okay, great.
read a little better.
So I think we have Jeff on if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And Noel, this is Jeff Buck from Sanctuary in the Ordinary. Question regarding moderate rehab of buildings and the application of the requirements for building code compliance and Energy Star. If you're not needing to replace a certain system, how do you apply those requirements?
That's a question that I'm going to pass over to Bill. Bill, do you care to comment on that?
So Jeff, the question was about what standards other than Energy Star?
No, it's really for the 2 requirements of building code compliance and Energy Star. Those 2 requirements for moderate rehab. If there's a system that you're not having to touch as part of the rehab, how do those requirements apply? Let's just say the HVAC system, is a relatively new, maybe it's a relatively new HVAC system. You don't need to replace it. How do you deal with that as far as the industry star?
Yeah, I just think you tell us in your proposal that, the furnace is, 3 years old, it doesn't need to be replaced. Most furnaces that are new are energy efficient. So I think you just mention it in the narrative section.
Okay, and that would carry it forward for building codes as well of things that, again, if you're not touching it, that you, as long as it's grandfathered in, I guess would be a way to say it.
Yeah, that may be more of a case by case basis, and we probably have to work with you when we get there. But I think if it's an obvious code violation, you need to address it. If it's a health or safety thing,
Right, of course.
yeah. But if it's something like, the basement stairs, treads, and risers aren't the right height for current code, I think that's grandfathered in. I don't think we can necessarily make you address that if you don't want to.
Okay.
Let me also jump in here to address the previously asked question. The CDA team was messaging on our end, and we did conclude that applicants can apply as part of a team and independently.
Great. Let's do one more live, and then we'll get back to some of the written Q&As. So I'm going to unmute Jessica.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, so I am a party to a nonprofit that will be applying, and then I also, which I don't have ownership interest in, and then I also have ownership interest in a construction company. Can I apply? Can both entities apply with my involvement?
I feel like I would rather keep this Q&A to general questions about the NOFA, and with such fact-specific questions, if you can provide them in writing and we can share them, because I'm not an expert on conflicts of interest, but our general counsel is. And so if you can provide that, to be very honest with you, my instinct is that there's not an issue, but I don't feel comfortable making that decision right now with limited facts.
Okay.
So if you can provide that question in writing, we can pose it to our general counsel and provide you with clear guidance. And I think that should go for any other question that is focused more at very specific individual fact patterns, as opposed to general questions about the NOFA. We would strongly encourage you to submit these questions in writing so we can give them the thought and consideration that they deserve.
Thank you. I have one other question, if that's okay. It's
And
as the non. Oh.
I was just going to say, if we can drop that email address in the chat so that folks can provide those questions, that would be great. Go ahead, Jessica. I'm sorry.
No, thank you for that as well. On the nonprofit side, I'm not sure if this is a specific or a general question as well, but can a nonprofit that has received funding through the revolving loan fund also apply for this grant?
Yes, but can you define which revolving loan fund you're referring to?
The NMTC, the New Market Tax Credit Revolving Loan Fund.
Got it. Yes, they would be eligible to apply. It may not be a good idea to braid those funding sources together on the same project. Case determination, but there's no eligibility prong that renders those entities ineligible, so long as, of course, they are eligible under all the conditions provided for in the NOFA.
Exactly. Yeah, we would be using them for separate projects. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay, let's go back to some of these written questions. Where can an applicant find a COVID impact statement? Or maybe we can elaborate on what that should entail.
COVID impact statement, we can research examples, but typically they range from a very simple statement of, on an individual basis, it can be a individual statement that they lost their job due to COVID. That's a typical COVID impact statement for an individual. For a entity, it's really interesting because ARPA, for the first time, has allowed nonprofit entities to be classified as beneficiaries if they were impacted by COVID. I don't know that we've got a great example. It's really on that entity to describe really as clearly as possible the impact that COVID had on their operations. And so there's no really, it can be really short. So there's no real form. It is much more kind of particular to the impact that COVID had on your organization.
Great. Another one from the Q&A is if a development project already started or starts before 2024, is it eligible for this NOFA?
Absolutely.
Great. And would building or renovating an emergency shelter fit under the categories of this NOFA?
Yes.
Someone asked that we made a revision of the NOFA, and I will answer that. We just uploaded it right before this meeting, and we will make sure there's a date on it so you know you're looking at the most recent one, but refresh the page before you open it. The next one is what type of insurance is required for small nonprofits participating in this NOFA?
I might toss that to one of our key members, whoever feels confident in pulling up that section of the NOFA. It is detailed in the NOFA. Is anyone brave enough to take that question on?
I guess that falls to me since I'm in the monitoring section. This is a little bit different than the usual insurance requirements that we have for CDBG because it is so project specific. But in general, we require nonprofits to have general liability insurance, proof of automobile liability insurance, and evidence of honesty bonding, which is really important to have that evidence of honesty bonding. It will be specific based off of the project that you have. We don't want to like overly burden nonprofits with having to take out $1 million in insurance if you're only doing $50K worth of a project as part of a team. So it is going to be specific, but you do need to have that honesty bonding and those insurance enough to cover that, as well as CDA needs to be listed as an additional insured on your insurance form.
Thank you so much, Mariana.
There's
No
a few questions.
problem.
Thank you. We'll get back to some live questions in a second. There's been a few questions about the North Side Corridor business grants. And I know that is a separate program from this. Noel, could you just quickly describe how those are different?
Yeah, they're different. They were appropriated separately. And the fact of the matter is that we are waiting on a legislative amendment to those funds before moving forward with their disbursement. There's some challenges in the program design from a regulatory compliance perspective. And so until the Board of Aldermen takes action to redesign the program somewhat, we're unfortunately somewhat stuck. However, I can share that there will be and a lot of this is really SLDC is leading this program, not CDA, but we are close partners and the funding does flow through CDA. And so I can also share that SLDC recently brought the National Development Council on board to provide capacity building support to entities which applied for those commercial corridor funds. And hopefully, while we wait for that legislative fix, those applicants can work with the National Development Council to strengthen their proposals, develop business plans so that they're in the strongest possible position to apply for those funds.
Great. Let's go back to some of the live questions here. I'm going to bring Justin on. Justin, are you still there?
Hello, yes. Nice to meet you all. Appreciate the hard work you're doing. I would like to know, you all talk about the city and LRA lots. I'd like to know, do you all still have the $1,000 lease option that gives temporary ownership for a year? I have not seen that in a couple of years on you all's website, and I want to know, is that still available, and can we put that towards in our application?
It's good to meet you as well, Justin. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that question. LRA is across the hall from us. We work closely with them, but we are distinct entities. What I can share is that this is a unique vehicle to apply for and propose the redevelopment of LRA lots. And so setting aside what is available on LRA's website, and at the end of the day, LRA will have the final word on all of this, on how they use their property. But we will be partnering with LRA. We are partnering with LRA on this NOFA, and we'll be sharing all the applications that propose the redevelopment or activation of LRA lots with LRA for their consideration. So even if that application isn't open on the LRA website, you can apply to this NOFA.
Okay, thank you. You put me back on mute. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Let's do another live question. I'm going to bring Christina on. Christina,
Hello,
can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Christina.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. So I just want to touch on the LRA property. I was able to get a property back in September. I've started work on it, but there was more that needed to be disclosed about it than what was presented with the LRA. So I wanted to ask, I'm not necessarily a nonprofit. I would like to get into that. This is my first project. I got out of the military last year, and so I'm trying to create affordable housing for preferably veterans starting out, because that is just my, that's just my jam right now. But I guess what I'm asking is, I see a lot of nonprofit and business entities, but it's not necessarily a lot of individual verbiage as far as like how I would kind of shuffle into the process.
Right. That's a great question. And I'll share that in principle, an individual that is incorporated as a developer and has all the requisite insurance requirements and has demonstrated capacity to administer federal funds could apply for these funds in theory. But frankly, these funds are administratively burdensome and frankly are not designed for individuals. The funds are designed for better or worse, and I do think that it limits the availability to invest in grassroots development. They're really designed for sophisticated parties. That's why we are strongly encouraging teams and would strongly encourage you to partner with a nonprofit or a CDC in your neighborhood or other entities that do have that experience and capacity to administer federal grants, to produce that documentation and reporting. And then you can still do the work and still be funded to do the work, but it would be through this other entity. Does that make sense?
It does. It's just historically, even with that, communities are still disadvantaged by that because it is expensive as far as all of that goes. And so what I'm trying to understand and figure out in the St. Louis area, because I do want to eventually like do the whole street, but it's not set up for someone to want to or be able to do that just on their own free will. And that's where I'm trying to understand, where do I go from here?
It's a huge issue and something that we grapple with. And I will note that these funds are not subject to environmental review, to Davis-Bacon, to Section 3, all of which are requirements which are regularly attached to HUD funds and make them even more administratively burdensome. So they're a step down, and that's why we are really trying with this NOFA to fund community-driven development. But you're absolutely right that due to federal law and structures that are beyond we're downstream from factors that we are required to comply with. And so therefore, while again, in theory, individuals can apply for these funds, in practice, we strongly encourage you to work with a nonprofit that has experience. I don't know if Rashonda or Bill, you have any additional insight to offer on this question. Thank you, Christina.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's do one more live question and then I'll read some more Q&As. This next one is Jay. Jay, are you still here? Can you hear us? Jay, are you still there? Jay? Okay.
Tommy,
Yes.
Tommy, this is Rashonda.
Hi.
I was thinking about Christina's question, and I would just
Okay.
encourage her to look into the property that she's working on now and what neighborhood association may be useful to connect with, and then take your property to the neighborhood association and your plan and see if you guys can put something together to submit for this NOFA. Don't give up just because you're an individual working on this. Look into your neighborhood association or look into maybe contacting your new alderman, but you definitely can do it as an individual. Just connect, and your passion is wonderful. So please be encouraged.
Thanks, Rashonda. We're gonna let's have Michael.
Hello, this is Michael Burns with Northside Community Housing. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I just wanted to know if you could apply for more than one of those bullet points. Say, for instance, if you wanted to do housing production, but you also wanted to do capacity build.
Yes, you absolutely can, provided that you're eligible for both. The answer is yes, in short.
Yeah, that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well.
Okay, let's go back to the written Q&A. Where can an applicant find a list of CDA-owned properties? I believe there's a map in the NOFA.
That's right.
Okay. And can you provide an example of the beneficiary versus sub-recipient classification for a small neighborhood-based nonprofit looking to hire both organizational staff and contractor services for neighborhood beautification?
That's a really, really tricky distinction, and one that we don't have an established policy on at this point. It will be extremely fact specific, because the key is that we can designate an entity as a beneficiary, provided that A, they have that disproportionate impact from COVID, but B, that the assistance that they are requesting is proportionate to that impact, right? So it hinges not only on the degree of COVID impact, but also on what they are requesting. And so it is an extremely fact-specific determination. And it may even wind up being possible that we will take that same entity and say that they are a beneficiary for capacity building purposes, because they would have built more capacity were it not for the pandemic, but they are not a beneficiary for beautification purposes or for proactive development purposes. And so we will certainly, our preference, provided that Well, actually, we'll have countervailing preferences. We'll have one preference, which is to make these funds more accessible and therefore designate individuals as beneficiaries. But we'll have a countervailing preference that designating applicants as subrecipients is the best way to protect us and protect you as well. And so it'll really be an extremely fact-specific determination. I can't provide any more detail than that at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm still reading from the written Q&As. This is a pretty good one. Does the award cap of 2.5 million, does that apply to the entire team application or individual proposals within that application?
It applies to individual proposals within the application, and additionally, it's not a hard cap, and neither is the $100,000 a hard minimum. That is what the range of awards that we anticipate making. There may be exceptions, although that's not particularly likely, but we don't want to foreclose certain applications, because the truth is that we understand that each neighborhood and each community has a unique set of needs, and therefore we really have been intentional about trying to ensure that this NOFA is as flexible as possible.
Great. Let's do a few more written Q&As and we'll get back to the patient people who have their hands raised. These questions are still coming, so I think we want to clarify. Can an organization or individual be on two different teams? And then also, can one nonprofit apply for multiple applications or multiple proposals?
Per discussion that we're having in practically real time, yes. The answer to both those questions is yes.
And if you, if someone receives,
and the reason, and I'll add, the reason that that's consistent is because the way that we're reviewing these is on a holistic level. So if an entity applies twice in two different teams, we'll review each of those programs and projects separately as part of each respective holistic application, and then we'll review them each individually, because we were already going to tear them apart for review purposes. So again, yes, this is designed to be flexible. The same entity can apply for distinct projects and programs on different teams. What they absolutely should not do, however, is apply for the same project or program on different teams, or submit duplicate applications for the same project or program.
Great. And to receive an award from neighborhood transformation grants, does that disqualify you in any way for other grants from CDA or other city agencies?
No.
Great. Let's go back to, we'll do a few live ones. I think we have Kave. See if he's still here. I keep on muting him on accident. There he is.
There we go. Got me?
Hi. Yes.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for everything. I was just wondering, you sort of answered this. If organizations are applying for multiple categories, do all the different categories need to be in a single application? And the second question is, does receiving this award preclude or disqualify other awards, like, for example, the housing production NOFA coming out in April, or awards from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, et cetera?
So first answer, they certainly can and are encouraged to be in the same application, but they also do not need to be, as just described. And then secondly, but if it were targeting the same geographic area, it would make a lot of sense for it to be in the same application, I will emphasize. With respect to the second question, again, no, receiving neighborhood transformation grants in no way disqualifies you or even lends a reduced preference to the award of other CDA grants or other city grants. And I will emphasize that we anticipate in all likelihood a lot of duplicate applications to both for housing production, for both neighborhood transformation grants and ARPA funding, and our HUD housing production spring NOFA. We anticipate a lot of duplicate applications, and we'll be reviewing them intentionally such that between the HUD funds and ARPA funds, we can provide as much funding as possible, as strategically as possible, because there may be projects that come in under neighborhood transformation grants and HUD, and that we conclude actually make a lot more sense for HUD funding because they are more sophisticated parties, whereas other applications make more sense for ARPA. So we're going to be reviewing housing production applications to both funding opportunities kind of in parallel and making strategic decisions.
Perfect, thank you.
Tommy, you're muted.
We have several hands raised, so let's go to Todd. Todd, are you there?
Yes, thank you. I want to thank CDA for this webinar. I think you all are doing a wonderful job in explaining this program. I want to ask, does the individual who are applying for the home repair grants has to prove financial impact or financial economic impact through their financial records to be accepted through the program by COVID?
So it all depends on what capacity they're applying to, and thank you, Brother Todd. So are you describing an individual homeowner who is applying for home repair support, or are you describing a contractor, or are you describing a nonprofit?
A homeowner who's applying for the grant to get their home repaired, would they have to, show that they was financially impacted through their financial records to be eligible for the grant?
Not necessarily, because there's a presumption that individuals who live in qualified census tracts are disproportionately impacted by COVID. And the real eligibility criteria is that the individual is low to moderate income and earns below 80% AMI. However, I want to clarify that this home repair NOFA is really geared at contractors and nonprofits, not at individual homeowners. If individual homeowners are seeking assistance, they can absolutely reach out to CDA's home repair hotline, which if someone can drop in the chat, that would be great. And we can look into determine their eligibility, determine whether it's an urgent need and therefore a priority, and move forward in deploying home repair services. But this NOFA is not for individuals to apply for home repair services. It is for contractors and nonprofits to apply to help the city expand our capacity to provide home repair services. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. I was just wanting to make sure that those contractors and those nonprofit organizations that identify those homes that they want to repair, they would have to also submit to you all that this particular household right here was impacted by COVID as an individual. But I guess because since they're in those consensus tracts and they already been identified as an area that's been impacted, automatically should qualify them, right?
Yeah, and honestly, my thought from a compliance standpoint is, hey, it couldn't hurt to have that compliance box ticked as well. But the truth is that it should be enough just that they are income eligible, low to moderate income individuals in qualified census tracts. That said, I've heard a really great argument that all individuals have been impacted by COVID financially due to inflation. So there's different ways to argue the COVID impact point. But I don't think it is required to qualify. It is not required to qualify for home repair services. All that is required is to be a low to moderate income owner occupant.
Well, I'm glad you're taking that position, CDA, because the state has been looking at it differently. They've been trying to, make individuals prove that they've been impacted as an individual when they already know that the area that's applying for the money has been impacted itself. So I thank you for taking that position.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to our next live question, but I want to do a shout out to city employees and SLDC neighborhood managers in the chat, sharing lots of great resources. We're going to go to Trevon. Oh, where'd he go, Mr.? There he is.
Hello,
can you hear
me?
Yes.
I can.
We can
My
hear you.
question was, what requirements need to be met for affordable housing loans to be forgiven? You mentioned that earlier.
The compliance requirements and the 4 prongs, and I encourage anyone interested in applying for affordable housing forgivable loans under this NOFA to look up the Affordable Housing How-To Guide released by Treasury. And again, if we can release that in the chat or share that in the chat, that would be great. But essentially, that guide shares 4 essential compliance prongs that need to be met with. The first is affordability, and that is that there actually need to be low to moderate income individuals who either purchase the home if it's a for sale home, or who rent at least the units if it's a rental project. So we need to verify there's real low to moderate income individuals there, and they're paying rent or bought the home at an affordable level. That's the first element. Second, for rental housing, there needs to be a covenant that runs with the land requiring that it's going to be affordable for 20 years. And then at the end of that 20 years is where the loan may be forgiven. For sale housing, it's a little different. And I've seen this question in the chat, so I'm going to turn it over to Bill to talk a little bit about the affordability process for sale homes as it works under home. Because that's the other thing that ARPA does, and that Affordable Housing How-To Guide does, is that it provides that the standards that apply under HUD's home program are safe harbor. And so I'll let Bill speak on that in a moment, but first let me talk about the 2 other prongs. We've talked about affordability, the fact that there's real low to moderate income individuals there, that there's a covenant that runs with the land for 20 years in the case of rental, for a varying amount of years for sale. And then the other 2 elements are tenant protections and quality standards. So compliance with that over the life of the project of the affordability period is what results in loan forgiveness. Bill, I will turn it over to you to talk about the home standards for sale housing.
Okay, thank you. No, so generally our loans, the funding to the developer is forgiven once the property is constructed, or if it's a rehab, if it's rehabilitated, and the buyer, an eligible buyer, purchases the home. But as Noel was saying, there's affordability requirements, and generally we ask that the home buyer stay in the property for 5 years, provide a minimal amount of down payment assistance, and that loan for the buyer gets forgiven at the end of 5 years. If we do it that way, it's a better model than applying the subsidy to the developer for the construction. Otherwise, that amount gets tagged to the affordability, and the number of years expands up to 15. So, and I think it's 20 for new construction. So to make it short, you want to provide down payment assistance, from anywhere from like $1,000 to $5,000 to your buyer, so that will be the affordability period for them. It'll be 5 years, and they won't be saddled with a huge burden of affordability.
Are you saying after 5 years, the buyer's mortgage will be forgiven?
Not the mortgage, no. Just if you give them $5,000 for down payment assistance, it's going to get forgiven at the rate of $1,000 each year, but not the mortgage. They have to get a mortgage.
Okay, gotcha. I got one last question that ties into all that. You say for the rental, the land has to be affordable for 20 years. And in that 20 years, you're still making the minimum payments on that loan, aren't you?
Bill, can you address that? It depends on whether there's cash flow in the project, essentially.
Yeah, generally, if we structure our projects so that a portion of the cash flow that's generated on the rental has to get paid back, and sometimes as low as 25%, and that's net annual cash flow. So that's after all the bills are paid, your insurance, your taxes, your upkeep, things like cutting the grass, things like that. If there's anything left, then part of that money gets paid back.
And other debt service potentially, if there's first position debt on it.
Correct.
Got it.
One thing to note, if you want to find a lot of the links to the Treasury and the affordable housing guidelines and all the SOAR stuff. It's in Appendix 6, which is page 55 of the NOFA. There's a ton of links to all of these compliance things that we're talking about. And we encourage you guys to go check those out to answer your more specific questions as well. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Thanks, Marianne. Tommy, you are muted again.
Sorry, my neighbor's on the phone. Let's go to Jay. Jay, are you still there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, hi there. Okay, so my name's Dawn. I have someone else in here who's named Jay, but somehow I think we got our links. I got his link and he's probably got mine. But let me get to the question. Since these funds have been promoted as being part of the economic equity or economic justice initiatives, are there any funds that are being set aside for women and minorities or people who have new businesses? For instance, people who have been in business less than 5 years, or people who have had less than 5 years of active business. What are they really doing to ensure that these funds are supporting and funding and encouraging and funding new business in the city of St. Louis, as opposed to the people that have been in business for years, taking advantage of all the funds and initiatives that are available?
It's a great question, and you're absolutely right that this is a part of the city's economic justice action plan to empower, develop, and transform the city. The way we've applied the equity lens is, instead of set-asides and quotas that can frankly get a little tricky from a legal compliance perspective, we focused our equity lens on the geography and the eligible geography, and ensuring that the neighborhoods that we are targeting are those that have been disproportionately impacted historically by segregation, redlining, restrictive covenants, and the like. And you can see this in the economic justice index that informs the bonus points that we're applying geographically and the eligible geography. And so if you look at that eligible geography, and there's a map in the NOFA as well as on the city website, you'll see that it covers the entire north side, as well as the parts of South St. Louis with the highest rates of poverty, disinvestment, and other indicators. And the other piece that I'll add is that, with the exception of home repair funds, these funds are all targeted at nonprofits and small contractors. And that's another way that we're protecting against that, is that these funds are not the biggest developers that typically receive these funds, or that often are, because they're sophisticated entities, most able to compete for these funds. But we're really targeting those community-driven, community-based organizations.
Right, but the small contractors may or may not be new businesses, and I thought that part of this this initiative, or the I forget the other word you used, is also to encourage new business in the city of St. Louis, in these marginalized and disadvantaged areas. Because I know personally, being a female, and over the years, it's been very hard to compete with trying to get funding or grants, especially in professions or in business areas where they've been traditionally male dominated. So I was just wondering, like, what are the safeguards in place to bring new business, as opposed to the same larger or small contractors and not-for-profits who are more experienced, having an advantage over, say, some of the newer businesses. But it doesn't sound like there's really much they've done to safeguard or ensure that there's equity in that regard.
So, Ms. Stovall, this is Rashonda Alexander. If you could directly chat me with your email, I'm going to send you something that I think will be very helpful for you. On Thursday, on April the 6th, from 4 to 6 p.m. at our Northside Economic Empowerment Center, SLDC is doing something specifically for MWBE companies that I think you may be interested in. So I want to send you that direct communication. So please directly message me so that I can get this email over to you, and
Great.
hopefully you can attend and that can help you.
Great, ma'am. Yeah, because the name of my business is Initiative for Conservation of Renewable Energy, and I've had a registered LLC since 2012, but have found very little support. So I thank you so much for that resource and referral, and I look forward to meeting with you guys there. And what was the date and time again, please?
It is on April the 6th from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Northside Economic Empowerment Center. And if you message me directly right now on Zoom, I'll send you the email. Congratulations to you. Keep up the good work.
Okay, thank you. But that, you know, now the deadline for these applications is May 31st, right?
May 15th. And I also want to add, as we're talking about this, that all the city's MWBE participation requirements apply, and we are also providing points. There's 5 points on the application, which are associated with applicants having a track record of compliance with our MWBE requirements. The challenge really is, with respect to establishing quotas that go beyond our MWBE requirements, a matter of legal compliance, because the Supreme Court has unfortunately held that such quotas, when they're not backed up by a full disparity study, are unenforceable and trigger equal protection concerns. So we're trying to bake equity into this at a very fundamental level in terms of the process that we're following to allocate funds, holding public hearings, focusing it on a geography which has been disproportionately impacted, and awarding points for compliance with the city's MWBE policies.
Oh, right. I understand that. I've had family who have served in the state representative and alderman over the years, so I'm all about fairness and equity. I'm just mostly was concerned about bringing new business, and if not now or in the future, are there going to be, is there going to be anything that's specific to people who say have been in business 5 years or less, or what's being done to encourage like new business to come to the St. Louis area? But thank you so much for answering my questions, and I'll let you guys get to the next person.
Thank you.
Okay, let's keep going through these raised hands, and we have Judith next. Judith, are you still there? Judith Arnold, can you hear us? Okay, let's just we'll park that there. And let's go to Jessica.
Hi all, just one other question. You mentioned that we could start projects before awards were granted. Does that mean that any funds that are spent prior to the awards being given will be reimbursed?
No, that is not what that answer was intended to imply. Simply that the project itself could be underway, and if gap funding was needed, that project could apply for these funds.
Okay, but there won't be reimbursement for monies already spent on a project that we are applying for under this grant?
Not at this time. We can take a deeper look at it, but not at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's go to Leon now. Leon, are you still there? Hey, Leon. Okay. Let's see if Justin. Justin, can you hear us?
Hey, everybody.
We hear you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
My question is, I know you all are wrapping this around ARPA and all their nice requirements. Can we get preferential points for implementing some of the Justice 40 requirements?
It's not something that is explicitly called out in the NOFA, but I believe that there's alignment between the Economic Justice Action Plan and the Justice 40 initiative. And I think that if you can call some of those elements out in the narrative, it may in fact reflect well on the application, but there are no bonus points explicitly allocated to alignment with the White House's Justice 40 initiative.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Okay, let's go through some of these written questions now. If an applicant's budget is too large for the capacity building grant, can home repair funds be used to add staff to complete minor repairs?
Yes.
Yes.
No, go ahead.
Okay. What about creative placemaking activities? Is that an eligible use?
Yes, we encourage applicants to look at the Vacancy Collaborative's Vacancy to Vibrancy toolkit for ideas and inspiration, although the eligible uses are not necessarily limited to that. ARPA's Treasury Final Rule, the Treasury's Final Rule does explicitly enumerate greening vacant lots and removing blight as an eligible use. However, I should flag that there will be individualized eligibility analyses for each proposed use, and it is possible that certain proposals go beyond the scope of our ARPA eligible activities.
Great. Would a health center fit into an eligible use for this NOFA?
Absolutely. The appropriate eligible use category would be proactive development of community assets. And we do believe that health centers expanding access to healthcare to low to moderate income residents are community assets.
If this project works with a CDA or LRA property, is that held by the city until the funds are awarded to the NOFA, or what's the process of transferring that property to the applicant if they're awarded?
I'm going to pass that over to Bill to talk about our disposition process.
We wouldn't award the property or we wouldn't allow the property to be acquired from us until there was an award made. That's a pretty simple answer, but because if we awarded if you got the property now and you didn't get funding, then the property is just going to continue to be vacant until such time as funding is obtained.
Thank you, Bill.
Will there be any priority for organizations that have applied for multiple projects and proposals?
No, not necessarily.
I'm
not sure I understand the question, to be honest.
I think are there extra points or preferences for an applicant that wants to do many things as opposed to an applicant that wants to do one thing?
No, but we will evaluate team applications holistically. And so if there is a team application that proposes a more holistic approach to neighborhood transformation, that will receive more points. But then at the end of the day, each component part of the proposal will be evaluated independently.
Great. And what about national night outs? Is that something that could be an eligible use?
It depends on what the activities that would be going on the national night out would be. If it's a beautification activity, then potentially, but it needs to be tied into the eligible activities under this grant. And the truth is that CDA does not have expertise in public safety, and therefore a purely public safety focused proposal for a national night out would not be eligible unless it was providing outputs and activities that are eligible under this NOFA.
Great. And what about Prop NS properties, those that have been stabilized by Prop NS? Are they something that could be acquired and developed through this NOFA?
I believe so at this time. However, I've heard flags about rating those funds. So I just want to take a deeper look at it. But conceptually, from our perspective, yes. But I wouldn't want to speak for Prop NS.
Could you please define sufficient private and other financing and or equity to leverage public funding? And what is the minimum percent match that will yield those bonus points?
Well, first of all, the leverage factor is not a bonus point. It is something that is a part of the evaluation of every project and something that we look for. However, we did not create hard lines in the NOFA, and the reason is we want to see the applicant pool and what levels of leverage different applicants and different eligible use categories have associated with them. And so the answer is that it'll be a contextual analysis conducted by CDA review teams of at least 3 staff that as they look at the applications for a given eligible use, will kind of look to the spread of leverage and award more points to the projects with the most leverage.
Great. We are getting through most of the written questions, and then we'll get back to, we have some folks that had their hands raised before, and it looks like they have new questions. So we'll get to them shortly. There's a written question: would an athletic program for youth, would that be a eligible use for this NOFA?
I don't believe so is the answer. We are not looking to fund programming, with the exception of home repair, which is really pretty physical, and beautification and capacity building with this grant. We're looking to fund physical development with the first 2 eligible use categories of affordable housing and proactive development of community assets. Those are all physical development. With home repair, it's a program, but it's a program to provide physical construction services. And with beautification, it's again, we're looking at physically transforming a space. The only exception is capacity building grants to organizations. But at the end of the day, that capacity building needs to be tied to neighborhood transformation outcomes, right? When you apply for capacity building grants, you need to tell us what are the activities, what is the job description of this entity, person you want to hire, and how are they going to be driving neighborhood transformation? So no, youth programming, it's incredibly needed, and there's funding opportunities through the Department of Health for youth programming, as well as through the Office of Violence Prevention, as well as through CDA in other funding opportunities, but it is not eligible under this neighborhood transformation grants NOFA.
Great, and I believe we've touched on this topic before, and I think we're close to the end answering all these questions. Within a larger proposal, if that can't be funded, could smaller things within it receive funding?
Absolutely, and I fully expect that will happen frequently. I have no idea what the volume of applications will look like, although judging by the over 150 people on this call, it may be significant. But I do fully expect that we will issue many partial awards.
Great. This is an interesting question about neighborhood beautification. If this group already holds volunteer events like alley cleanups, and they apply for funding, will they still be able to hold volunteer events, or would they have to pay for these services?
You could absolutely continue to host volunteer events. You just have to tell us in your budget what eligible uses you'd be spending the money on, whether that's to scale or conduct other non-volunteer events or what have you, but we would by no means force you to stop holding volunteer events.
Great. Let's do one more written question, and then we have 2 hands raised, so we'll get back to them. Can you please clarify how the team submission process works if you have 2 nonprofits working together?
Sure.
This is on an affordable housing development. And then their second question is, does the 50% AMI requirement apply to all the units in the development, or just a minimum threshold of units within that development?
Sure, great questions, both. So with respect to the first question, let's say there's two nonprofits that are proposing to conduct, that want to develop affordable housing in the same neighborhood or the same cluster of blocks. They would write a joint team submission letter where they describe their joint strategy, their joint budget, how the different roles and responsibilities, et cetera. And then they would both fill out independent applications, further detailing all their qualifications and experience, et cetera, et cetera. However, let's imagine that the partnership is a little different. So that's one example. Two affordable housing nonprofits developing affordable housing. They do a team submission, they submit jointly, but they each fill out full applications. On the other hand, let's imagine there's two nonprofits, one of which is the affordable housing developer and another of which is the junior partner and doesn't expect to actually receive or administer any funds. They're just providing support. In that case, the nonprofit that would be administering the funds would submit that application, and the other entity could write a letter of commitment or support or what have you. That's an answer to the first question. With respect to the second question, and this is an excellent question that I'm surprised we haven't received before, and which we may need to, we will probably need to provide written guidance to clarify the NOFA further. But the answer is that we will provide, it does not have to be 100% of the units at 50% AMI. We very much want to encourage the development of mixed income communities. However, we will, let's say that it's a building that is where half of the units are at 50% AMI and half of the units are market rate. We would only then be willing to fund up to 50% of that construction cost, if that makes sense.
Great. And then real quick before we get to the folks with their hands raised, there's an earlier question that referenced an emergency shelter. What category would that fall under?
It would fall under proactive development of community assets.
Great.
Unless it was permanent supportive housing, there can sometimes be a thin line. If it was permanent supportive housing, it would fall under the development of under affordable housing production and preservation.
Great. I'm going to go back to our live questions. These folks have already asked a question. So I want to make sure that I don't know if their hands are still raised or I didn't lower them. Justin, would you like to ask a question? Justin, are you there?
Sorry, I automatically took my hand back down after I answered the question.
Oh, okay.
Only question I got is where can I stand in line to get the check at?
A good question. We'll let you know. That'll be a TBA. Thank you. And then Kaveh, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, this is actually not Kaveh. This is Kaveh's coworker, Jennifer.
Hi.
Hi. So Mariana, thanks for trying to answer this question, but I'm still not clear. On page 19, it talks about under eligible use 2, the proactive community development of community assets, that affordable housing is eligible in that category, as well as the affordable housing production one. And I don't understand the difference since both of those are mentioning affordable housing. Can you tell us how you would differentiate between which eligible use you would want to put your project underneath if it is affordable housing? That's my first question.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. The reason why affordable housing is mentioned as an eligible use of proactive development of community assets is because we do believe that affordable housing is a community asset. Right. And therefore, and we also expect to potentially receive even more than $6.75 million of requests. And so we wanted to afford ourselves that flexibility with that $4 million to fund community assets, whatever they may be. However, we would strongly prefer, you should submit it under eligible use category number 1, affordable housing. Something that's something that's buried in the NOFA, and Mariana or Rashonda can point to the page, but it's essentially a clause that says that CDA staff may reassign a project or program to the relevant eligible use category at our discretion. So you may apply and say that we want to do this proactive development of this vacant lot into a community asset. And we may turn around and say, you know, that really fits better under neighborhood beautification, or vice versa, right? You may apply under neighborhood beautification. We may put it under proactive development. So at the end of the day, each project and program is going to be evaluated independently.
Okay. And my last quick question was whether or not your project has the potential of being fully funded. Is that purely based on the points system that we see listed? Like, I guess I'm trying to get a sense of like how you guys will deduce which sort of like buckets of projects might get fully funded and which might get partially.
Yeah, it is fully based on the point system, but frankly, the point system leaves some room for strategic decision making in light of a whole host of factors. I'll also emphasize that part of this depends on whether we characterize at the beginning of our process the entity as a subrecipient or a subcontractor. If we identify the entity as a subcontractor, we're going to be solely relying on the points as a Bible, right? And just being really adhering to that point-based competitive process. Whereas if we characterize the entity as a subrecipient, we may have a little bit more flexibility to bring in some other factors because that's what the subrecipient selection process allows for.
Okay, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Great. I've scrolled through the chat and the submitted questions, and I do not see any anymore. I'll ask for the help of my colleagues. Do you see any questions, or are there any questions or comments that you think that we need to make before we adjourn this public hearing?
No, I do believe we touched on everything.
Oh, wait, there was one that I think would be relevant to everyone. Sorry, it's a little loud in my section right now. Lisa Potts asked to please define sufficient private and other financing and or equity to leverage public funding. What is the minimum match percentage and what will yield the 5 extra points? Which could you maybe expand a little bit more, Noelle, like how we're asking people to give us like matched funds that you have or other funds and how you're leveraging your funding and how that impacts how things will be spent?
So first of all, we encourage applicants to consider a wide range of different matching sources. It can be in kind. It doesn't have to be directly on the project. It can be part of the broader neighborhood transformation plan. And we strongly encourage you to collect letters, not just of support, but of commitment from community stakeholders, from small businesses or other nonprofits that are doing work in your target geography, even if it's not directly on the project. So that's number one. Number two, there is no minimum level of leverage which is required. Of course, no leverage will result in 0 points, and a high degree of leverage relative to the other applications will result in the full 5 points. But it really is going to depend on the pool of applications that we receive and how much leverage they reflect on average, and how much leverage they reflect within each eligible use pool.
Great.
There is, before we wrap up, a question that I've received and that didn't come up today, a bit to my surprise, in which I wanted to share an answer. And that is that I was asked whether churches are eligible applicants. And the answer is that so long as they are an incorporated nonprofit, and that nonprofit arm applies, and so long as they are proposing to conduct an eligible use and to spend the money on eligible uses, whether that's the production of affordable housing or neighborhood beautification activities or what have you, then a nonprofit church would be eligible. The only flag, however, is that under federal law, federal funds may not be used to support what the law calls inherently religious activities, which includes religious worship, instruction, or proselytization.
Great. There's one more question in the chat, and then I believe our staff has come to a consensus that we can close this at 4:50. So let's do one more and then do some closing comments. And this one is pretty key. Do projects have to be in qualified census tracts and economic justice index priority tracts? And maybe that's an and or, just clarify
Sorry,
exactly.
Can you repeat that question? I was distracted for a moment.
Oh, that's okay. Do the projects have to be in qualified census tracts and or economic justice index priority tracts?
They have to be in qualified census tracts or economic justice index priority tracts. Those two criteria are 90+% overlapping. Almost all qualified census tracts are also economic justice index priority tracts, but there's a couple of census tracts which are qualified census tracts but not economic justice index priority tracts, and vice versa. The map that is included in the NOFA includes both of those. So at the end of the day, the eligible geography is made up of all geographies which are in either one of those two geographic defined geographies. So you don't need to be in both. No.
Okay. Let's just run through a few more, and then we'll be collecting written questions via the CDD NOFA at stlewis-mo.gov email, and we will post FAQs on our website. This person has asked, when used in conjunction with LIHTC or HUD or other federal housing programs per Treasury rules for housing production, will those rules and guidelines supersede this NOFA if there's any sort of conflict?
Yes, absolutely. As soon as you bring HUD dollars into a project, the entire project becomes subject to HUD rules and regulations. And that's why, as we do prepare to issue our HUD housing production fund, we are very much going to be planning to, we will be prioritizing other HUD LIHTC projects more on that HUD housing production NOFA than on this one. The other really unique thing about ARPA funds is, as I mentioned before, they're not subject to environmental review, Davis-Bacon, Section 3 in the same way. And that means that there's much lower compliance costs per unit, which is why we're able to fund those smaller deferred maintenance projects, tiny home projects, and minor and moderate rehab projects. So our focus with these ARPA housing production funds is to get the biggest bang for our buck, whereas on the HUD housing production side, we do anticipate funding more LIHTC projects and more larger projects that braid several different funding sources together and are therefore subject to additional compliance requirements.
Great. Well, let's just leave that there and move to final comments. I would just like to thank everyone who came. At the peak we had 151 viewers on the Zoom, so it's such an honor that everyone would come and meet with us today, and we're just really happy to get the word out about this NOFA. So I will leave final comments to Noel.
Yeah, there's not much to add, but I certainly echo that we really appreciate the interest in these funds and the partnership. This program will succeed to the extent that we are able to empower you all out there doing the work in the community to expand your work. And we're just honored and privileged to have the responsibility of dispersing these funds and putting them to work in partnership with you also. Look forward to seeing the applications and just really excited to see the ideas and grassroots proposals that come in. Thank you all.
Thank you. And Joe at STL TV, thank you for all of your technical support and making this Zoom a huge success. CDA never anticipated having more than 100 people here. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Joe, it looks like people are dropping out, so I'm just going to stay on. And let me know if you need anything. and you can end it when you're ready.
Okay, so they're just gonna, are they ending the meeting or?
Yep, we're all done. So whatever you need to do, if you need to end it or
Yep,
anyway.
I'll just end everything then.
Okay, great. Oh, and